Hey everyone, my name's Nikita, and welcome to Wolf Studio. Have you ever lied on your resume, been accepted for the job, and then had to pull a miracle out of your ass in order to not be publicly humiliated? Well, that's basically what happened in this project. Keep watching, and I'll tell you all about it. If there is one technique in woodworking that's always perceived as a bit of a dark art, it's wood bending. And that makes sense. Wood is not a flexible material, and so creating curves in wood without carving it seems like it shouldn't be possible. I've wanted to learn and experiment with wood bending for a long time, not only because it looks impressive, but it also opens up a whole new realm of design possibilities. Going into this project, I knew I wanted curved elements to be a key design feature. In a fit of lunacy though, I decided to jump in at the deep end. Not only was the design I came up with extremely difficult, but the piece of furniture would be seen by thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. In essence, I staked my entire reputation on a project that I had no idea how to make. Before I tell you the story of how I got myself into this situation, let me first tell you what the project is. I'm making a media cabinet out of ash. I'll talk about the design in far more detail a bit later, but for now, here's what you need to know. The cabinet is subdivided into 3 sections, a central area with a drawer and 2 side compartments. The main design feature is the doors that have a series of steam-bent tendrils or ribbons flowing across the fronts. As you can see, rather than going for simple geometric curves for my first steam bending project, I've made it just a little bit more complicated for myself. Before I get into the story of how, when, and why I designed this piece, let's check in quickly on the build. So far, I've just been breaking down the rough lumber and milling it into material for the main panels of the cabinet. At this point, I'm spending a long time looking at the boards and figuring out which ones should go next to each other. This is an incredibly important step, especially when you have characterful grain and color variance across the boards. Poorly matched boards can look really jarring and ugly, whereas when you get it right, you can create a sense of flow and balance across the surface. With the board layout chosen, gluing up the panels was relatively straightforward. I started with the most important panels, the top and sides, and then worked my way through the rest. So while you watch that, let me tell you how I got myself into this pressure cooker. Back in the summer of 2023, I came across this, an open call for applicants to participate in Ash Rise, an exhibition whose aim was to celebrate the ash tree and raise awareness of ash dieback. To be completely honest, before then, I'd never heard of ash dieback, and for those of you who don't know what it is, it's a fungus that's killing ash trees here in the UK. The projections indicate that we might lose up to 90% of our ash trees in the next 30 years. So really the point of the exhibition is to show what we can do with ash and try to popularize it as a material while we still have it. The exhibition would feature 20 objects made from one ash tree. 10 of which would be furniture pieces, and the other 10 would be art and sculpture. Now, if you're someone in a creative industry trying to make a name for yourself, exhibitions like these are so important for getting your work seen by lots of people, and the opportunity to exhibit in one doesn't come around very often. When I saw the open call, I knew I had to go for it. The first hurdle though would be producing a design good enough to be selected. The world is full of lovely, but let's face it, not very exciting furniture. And because of this, I think the worst thing you can do in this situation is make something nice. The whole point of participating in exhibitions is to show the world who you are as a maker, and hopefully leave enough of an impression that someone will think of you the next time they're in the market for a piece of furniture. And so, instead of trying to design something nice, it's far more important that you try to design a piece that stands out, even if it risks looking weird, unsettling, or downright ugly. Okay, I don't actively try and design ugly furniture. I do, however, try to design things that are different and, more importantly, personal. Let me be clear though, I'm not saying that normal furniture is bad. In fact, a house where every piece of furniture is something wild and artistic would be a bit of a nightmare to live in. What I am saying is, when you have a chance to show your work to lots of people, make it something memorable. Okay, so after getting all the panels glued up, I moved on to the joinery. I I considered making the casework with dovetails rather than domino reinforced miters, but I ended up going for miters for two reasons. The first one being that miters are more in line with the design philosophy of the piece, which I'll talk about later in the video. And the second reason, and probably the more honest one, was that I've never cut dovetails. And I'm not going to lie, I was far more scared of cutting dovetails than creating the intricate bent structure for the cabinet doors. I did, however, opt for sliding dovetails for the joinery of the cabinet partitions. Because the rough boards were so wonky prior to milling, I didn't manage to get them perfectly flat. So the dovetails are there to act as locking points to keep the top and bottom of the cabinet parallel. After cutting the joinery, giving it a wee dry fit and sanding all the inside faces, I could get on to getting it all glued up. A pretty straightforward process that just requires being methodical and paying attention to keeping the box nice and square. Okay, back to designing the piece and applying for the exhibition. Where did I start? Because I didn't have any idea what I should submit. The brief was extremely vague, and what it boiled down to was submit something nice that will highlight ash as a material. So me not really knowing where to start, I decided to get in touch with the exhibition curators and ask if there was a furniture type that hadn't been submitted. For example, if there had been lots of chair designs submitted, then I wouldn't submit a chair, as there would be more competition and less likelihood of being selected. Sadly, the reply I got was, just submit something you'd like to make. So my tactics rebuffed, I had a good hard think about what I wanted to make, and the answer was a centerpiece. In other words, a piece of furniture that was the focal point of a room. For example, the focal point of a dining room is a dining table, the focal point of a bedroom is a bed, and the focal point of a living room is, well, the TV. Well, I guess I decided to go for the next best thing and make the piece of furniture that a TV sits on. Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? Okay, all jokes aside, I had wanted to make a media cabinet for a while, but I wasn't sure if that would be a good piece to submit because it's quite a large piece of furniture and I didn't know how much material was available. Remember, one of the main ideas behind the exhibition was 20 objects from one tree. Problem was, I had no idea how much material that tree produced and if submitting a large piece of furniture would hurt my chances of being selected. In the end, I threw caution to the wind and soldiered ahead with designing a media cabinet. Finding a starting point for a design can be one of the most daunting parts of the creative process. Fortunately, in this case, there was one sentence in the design brief that helped me choose a starting point. That sentence was, "We are looking for pieces that highlight the natural properties of ash." Ash is probably best known for its bending properties. It steam bends really well, it doesn't shatter easily, and is resilient to repeated loading. This is why it was historically used in bow making and tool handles. So the first design element was an easy one. I needed curves to be a focal point of the piece. The second property that came to mind was staining. Now, I don't know if this is something that is associated with ash, but in my mind, ash is a wood that stains really well. Perhaps it's just because most of the furniture I'd seen that used ash had been stained either black or white. Either way, I knew I wanted to incorporate strong color contrasts in this piece. So those were my two starting points, curves and color contrast. And once I had decided that they would be the seeds of my design process, I began to start forming conceptual connections that would inform the shapes I drew on paper. And look, I get how pretentious that sounds, but bear with me, because it's really not that fancy schmancy. Before I get into it though, let's check back in on the project. Once I got the main body of the cabinet put together, I could move on to the next important component, the drawer. Now, I may have chickened out of dovetailing the main box, but I didn't chicken out of dovetailing the drawer. For some reason though, I went for this kind of weird variant that had a finger joint in between the two dovetails. Not too sure what I was thinking, but I guess I thought it looked cool at the time. You may have noticed that the drawer isn't as wide as the gap between the dividing panels, and that detail is critically important. See, the combination of the thickness of the doors, the way they open, and the layout of the compartments means that the opening for the drawer is actually thinner than the space in which it sits. Here, let me show you. The cabinet doors hinge around the outside corner, and the dividers are placed so that the outer compartments are the same width as the door. Here you can see that when the central doors are open, the space in between the dividers is larger than the space between the inside faces of the door. This means that the drawer needs to be narrower than the gap between the doors in order to be able to be opened. Honestly, there's not much to say about the drawer. It's pretty standard construction, with dovetails on the front corners and rebates on the back corners. I made the drawer bottom out of one book-matched piece, just as a nice surprise for anyone who notices. The drawer front though, that's where it gets a little bit interesting. The plan was just to make it a nice simple drawer front, but as I was building, there was an itch in my brain. A simple drawer front didn't feel right. It didn't feel like it tied in with the rest of the piece. This thought kept bothering me as I was making the drawer components, and one day it hit me like a slap in the face. The drawer front should be a miniature version of the front of the cabinet, like a babushka nesting doll. Upon opening the cabinet, you'd be greeted with a miniature version of what you just opened. I hadn't planned to do this, and I couldn't really afford the time, but that idea scratched the itch, and so it had to be done. While I finish the drawer, let's get back to talking about furniture design, because I left off on a statement that will 100% get me branded an art snob if I don't give you more context. So, what did I mean by conceptual connections in forming shapes? And yes, I do die a little bit every time I say that, but here, let me explain. What I'm essentially trying to describe is the process of asking myself, what does this remind me of? And by doing that, understanding what a shape, color, or texture makes me think of or how it makes me feel. And it's this understanding that helps me figure out what I want a piece of furniture to look like. At the time when I was designing this piece, I'd been listening to a lot of the Blind Boy podcast. It's a fantastic podcast if you're interested in creativity, culture, mythology, and loads of other topics. What Blind Boy had been talking about was biodiversity and colonialism. He was telling the story of how young rich aristocrats in the 1800s would embark on a world tour, which basically meant that they would swan about the British colonies for a few years, at the end of which they'd bring back exotic things to their estates. A common thing they'd bring back is plants to decorate the estate gardens, and if you've ever been to these gardens, you'll know that they're manicured to within an inch of their life, every plant perfectly trimmed and aligned in perfectly geometric shapes, nature tamed and parceled up into neat little patches to look pretty. So taking the first design element that I wanted to include, curves, I thought about the type of curves in furniture that really inspire me. What came to mind were dramatic, flowing, organic curves, the kind of curves that make you think of growth and nature. This is what I wanted the curved element of this piece to feel like, and because I'd been thinking about this story of taming nature, boxing up, making it look neat and pretty, I wondered if that could be reflected in some way in my piece. Cabinets, in general, are rectangular, so could I use that geometry as the counterpoint to my organic curved element? Could I take the simplicity and rigidity of perfectly aligned squares and use them to frame a sculpture of flowing tendrils? I then thought about the other design element I wanted to include, the use of stain and color contrast. When I see wood stained black, I don't quite fully see it as wood anymore. It's like it has been changed into a different material. After all, one of the key characteristics of wood, its color, has been stripped away and deadened. To me, this kind of ties in with the idea of humans controlling nature for aesthetic purposes. And so, all these thoughts came together, and a rough idea for what this piece should look like started to form. Rigid square geometry, stained black, containing organic flowing tendrils. With this as my basis, I got my pencil and paper out and began to sketch. Okay, I know some of you are listening and thinking, "F off, Nikita, it's just furniture. It's not that deep." And to those people, I say, you're 100% correct. Furniture isn't that deep, and I'm not telling you about this to make you think that my work holds some kind of higher meaning. I'm telling you about this to give you an insight into the creative process, or at least my creative process. I think that designing furniture can be quite hard sometimes. It can feel like everything has been done before, and in one sense, everything kinda has. If you think about the major styles of furniture, they all have very well defined sets of shapes, angles and proportions that give them their characteristic style. So when you sit down to design a piece of furniture, blank piece of paper in front of you, and you think, crap, the options are endless, I don't know what to draw. So you think to yourself, I really liked that mid-century modern desk I saw on YouTube a few days ago. Let me give designing something like that a try. Great. Now you have a clear idea of what you should be drawing. You can start putting pencil to paper and drawing those classic MCM lines. And as you draw, you slowly realize that you've jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire. You find that because it's such a well-established style, and so many different versions of the same thing have been done before within that style, it's almost impossible to draw something unique that makes you feel like you haven't just copied someone else. This is why I had to work on changing my creative process. I may have given that example in the second person, but that was basically my life as a designer for several years before I realized that I had to ignore the safety net that designing with a style provides and figure out another way to create furniture that I could be proud of. So, I went off on a creativity tangent there. I hope you don't mind. To me, it seems like a topic that's often shied away from, perhaps because it's one of those things where A doesn't really make sense without B, which in turn requires C to be mentioned, and all of a sudden what started out as a conversation about a table turned into talking about how your friend stole your candy when you were 5 years old. The point is, it's rarely a straightforward topic to talk about, and can lead to uncomfortable places. I spend hours and hours trying to write it down in a way that makes some semblance of sense so that I can share it with all you lovely people. So if you've enjoyed this video so far, consider subscribing, or a wee like and a comment would be super appreciated too. Thanks. With the drawer done, I got started on the final stage of this build, the doors. These doors serve a dual purpose, the first obviously being a door, and the second acting as a set of picture frames that suspend the sculptural tendrils. This, however, presented some rather tricky construction challenges, because if I made the doors and then tried to suspend all the curved pieces in afterwards, there's no way I'd be able to get it so that each door flowed perfectly into the next. I must have spent weeks thinking about how to do this, and what it eventually boiled down to was that I had to follow a very precise set of steps in order to put these doors together. Now, I'm rubbish at animating, so I'm going to explain this process with the aid of some sketches, and hopefully it'll kind of make sense. So this is what one frame with tendrils should look like. The borders have a thin profile but are quite deep in order to hold the curved sections. Step 1. I glue up 3 out of 4 sides of the frame. I do this using a jig to keep the frame square while the glue sets. Step 2. I glue the tendril structure onto an MDF backer using hot glue so that the backer can be removed easily. Step 3. I cut the MDF backer and tendrils into 4 parts that fit exactly inside the frames. The areas in red are discarded as this maintains the illusion of tendrils flowing from one frame to the next. Step 4. I glue the ends of the tendrils to the insides of the frames. Because the MDF backer is cut to the exact size of the frame, it keeps the tendrils aligned. Step 5. Once the tendrils are glued in, I remove the MDF backer and slide in the wooden back panel of the door. Step 6. I glue on the final sides of the doors, and voila! 4 frames with one continuous flowing sculpture suspended through them. I went about making the back panel of the doors in a slightly different way than usual. Rather than going for a standard book match, I went for what I'm calling a butterfly book match. And what it is rather than just cutting the board horizontally and opening it up like a book, you first cut the board in half vertically and then create a book match from each half. I find book matches to be both quite obvious and quite strong visually. To me, this butterfly version seems a little less in your face. The symmetry is still noticeable, but because it's not straight down the middle, it kinda hides in plain sight. I also realized while editing this video, a whole year after building the piece, that a better way to do it is to cut the board horizontally first, and then just cut one of the slices in half to book match each edge. Oh well, you live and learn, I guess. Alright people, we've reached the part that you all came to see. Remember at the start of the video when I said I lied on my resume? This is what I was referring to. I'd never so much as bent a toothpick, let alone created a sculpture made of multiple strands that each have multiple curves that vary in thickness and randomly split apart and rejoin. But that's what I'd promised to deliver to Scotland's national craft, furniture making and forestry institutions who were producing this exhibition. So where did I start? Because if you've seen other videos of it being done, then you've probably seen large formers made of stacked MDF, steel clamping straps and vacuum bags. Unfortunately, the usual bending techniques wouldn't work for me, and for a couple of good reasons. First, I have so many different curves to make that building an MDF form for each one would have taken so much time and so many sheets of MDF that I'd have bankrupted myself just trying to do it. And second, the only function of these curves is aesthetics. They don't need to be a specific size or radius to tie in with other components, they just need to look good. So in order to achieve that, I need to have a bending system that's super flexible, pardon the pun, so that I can easily tweak each curve so it flows just right. So the system you see here is the solution. A backing board with the design printed on it, and a series of blocks that I can drill in at key points along the curve to clamp the strips of wood to. It's not perfect though. The reason that formers and vacuum bags are used is to ensure that you get even clamping pressure all the way along the curve, which basically ensures that your glue lines are as tight as possible. With this system, what you achieve in speed, you lose in even clamping pressure. And the only way to minimize the consequences is to throw every clamp you have at it and hope you have enough to cover every centimeter along the curve. What you're witnessing right here is my first ever bent lamination, and I gotta tell you, it's unbelievably satisfying turning a few floppy strips into something that wood shouldn't be able to do. Now to do it again another 20 times. Every day I'd mill up some more strips, I'd reposition the clamping blocks, and glue up one more curve. I'd then get my spoke shave out and shave down each strand, refining the contours and feathering the ends. I slowly built up the layers, bringing curves together one by one to eventually form one interconnected structure. As each piece came together and more layers joined the party, I began to realize something. This didn't look good. The design on paper looked great, but the closer I got to it in real life, the worse it seemed to appear. Now, I'd spent a long time drawing these tendrils. I was meticulous with each curve, adding one here, taking away another there, until I'd produced something that I thought looked balanced and organic. But as they all started to come together in real life, they began to look far too crowded. I realized that I had to kill off one of the main branches of tendrils to allow the other one to take the spotlight. This is why being adventurous with your design is really challenging, because no matter how much time you put into drawing, 3D modeling, and photorealistic rendering, when you come to make the thing in real life, it will always look different. It took me years to understand this, even though, in hindsight, it makes total sense. Drawings on paper or 3D models on a screen will never be able to produce the same perspective, the same sense of scale, or the same presence a piece of furniture has in a room. And so, getting too attached to a drawing can only lead to disappointment when you finally make the thing and it looks and feels different to what you had expected. What I've learned is that as you stray further from the beaten path, you need to tap a lot more into feeling. And I don't mean like a woo-woo spiritual feeling. I just mean that when you're making something, the drawing on paper should only be a guide. And as you build the piece, you should always be evaluating if something is the right size or shape to achieve what you're aiming for. As I finished this sculpture, my stress levels began to rise and anxiety set in. I knew what was coming up next, and I knew I only had one shot. Any slight miscalculation or slip as I made a cut could mean weeks of work ruined. After so many days of bending, shaping, and sanding, I now had to cut this thing into 4 perfect segments. And when I say perfect, I mean perfect. A tiny bit too long and they distort the geometry of the doors. A tiny bit too short and I wouldn't get adequate contact between the door frame and the tendrils to glue them in. I don't usually consider woodworking an extreme sport, but this cut right here could have given skydiving a run for its money. With step 3 of my assembly plan done, I finally got the first glimpse of what the cabinet front would look like. And if you didn't catch that expression on my face, that was pure, unadulterated joy. After a bit of celebration, I moved on to step 4 in the assembly process, gluing the tendrils in. This was a bit of a gamble. These things are way too thin to have any sort of joinery, so I'm just trusting PVA glue to attach end grain to stained wood. Needless to say, that gamble did not go in my favor. After a few of the tendrils detached, I went back and secured them with some 2mm nails and epoxy. Unfortunately, I didn't film this because when I make a mistake or things don't go to plan, I go into panic mode, and all thoughts of content creation go out the window until I've fixed the problem. I am very happy to report though that apart from that one hiccup, the assembly plan actually worked. And before long, I had 4 finished doors, and all I had left to do was assemble and finish the cabinet. Honestly, I'm not going to narrate the rest of the process. You all have eyes and brains, and if there's anything you don't understand, just drop me a message or leave a comment. I promise I'll answer. I want to spend the last few minutes just trying to tie together the different topics I talked about in this video. Making furniture isn't only about creativity. There are so many reasons that people love doing this, both as a hobby and a profession. All of those reasons are completely valid. I don't want it to sound like I'm being disparaging of people who don't want to make art furniture like I do. It's just that being creative in this work is one of the main ways I find meaning in it, and so all I really want to do by talking about it is share that. And if listening to me inspires you to be more creative, then that's a bonus. There's also a bit more of a pragmatic reason for talking about what I talk about. I took a huge risk in this project, and luckily I came out unscathed. The reality is though, I could have failed. I could have messed up in some way and not been able to deliver what I'd promised. It would have been really embarrassing, and I'd have probably needed several months of therapy just to get over it. The key thing though is that if the worst had happened, I'd have still been happy that I went for it. If you're a maker just starting out and trying to make a name for yourself, in any discipline, not just furniture, it's so important to take risks and be bold. If you're making something that lots of people will see, whether that be online or in person, it needs to be memorable. At most, you get 30 seconds of someone's attention while they look at your piece, and then they're gone. Being creative and giving your work a story is how you make something that people will remember, even if they only look at it for a few seconds. So the next time you make something, throw caution to the wind, be bold and be creative. And if you fail, who cares? Just try again. Before I leave you, I just want to plug 2 things. If you'd like to support me, the link to my Patreon is in the description. Anyone who becomes a paid member has my eternal gratitude. The second is that this piece is for sale, or at least it will be once the exhibition has come to an end. If you'd be interested in purchasing it, just drop me a message. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.